the major prisoner exchange, Israel's attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, new details of Operation Web, and Russia's horrific strikes on Ukrainian cities. TSN correspondents have gathered the most important events of this week for you. Against the backdrop of Russia's endless crimes, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte announced the need for the alliance to increase its air defense by 400%. He emphasized that Russia is sowing terror from the skies over Ukrainian territory. Therefore, NATO must strengthen its air defense umbrella. Mark Rutte also announced that the alliance needs thousands of additional armored vehicles and tanks, millions of artillery shells, as well as a doubling of logistics, transport, and the medical system. What would happen if this were Paris or Berlin? The daughter of Trump's special representative, Keith Kellogg, once again responded emotionally to the massive Russian attacks. Megan Mops's foundation is providing assistance to our country. She herself shared footage of the attacks on Kyiv on social media and wrote, "Imagine waking up to the sound of air raid sirens. Explosions shake your windows and drones circle overhead.
Children are sleeping in metro stations."
Kellogg's daughter noted that a European capital is under siege, missiles are raining down on it, and civilians are being targeted. Megan Mops wondered what the reaction would be if this were happening in other European capitals, Paris or Berlin. Recently, Kellogg's daughter had already reached out to her father on social media, writing about a loud night in Ukraine and emphasizing, Maya, I quote, "It's a strange feeling that the Russians don't want peace." Meanwhile, the United States continues to flirt with the Kremlin. Secretary of State Marco Rubio congratulated the citizens of the aggressor state on Russia Day, expressed hope for constructive cooperation with Moscow in efforts to achieve peace in its war with Ukraine, and stated, I quote, "Peace will contribute to more mutually beneficial relations between our countries." The day before, the American Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, was asked a number of uncomfortable questions about Ukraine. These questions came from his fellow Republican senators. Mitch McConnell, in particular, warned him against being lenient with Russia, as this leads to the loss of Democratic allies. And Lindsey Graham stated that Putin will not stop at Ukraine. Let me remind you, the Trump administration did not allocate a single dollar of military aid to Ukraine, but weapons are still being delivered as part of the packages provided by Joe Biden. This week, the European Commission presented a new, already 18th package of sanctions against Russia. It targets two sectors of the aggressor country, the energy and banking sectors. Talks about its preparation began as early as last month. The main and long-awaited step proposed by Brussels is to lower the price cap on Russian oil from the current $60 per barrel to $45. However, as Radio Liberty notes, this restriction must also receive approval from the United States. Western leaders hope to reach an agreement on this next week during the G7 summit in Canada. And while the EU and the US are negotiating whether to cap the price of Russian oil, the global price of crude has surged sharply upward. This happened against the backdrop of an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. And this is the largest attack since the Iran-Iraq war. The special operation, codenamed Rising Lion, was carried out to prevent Tehran from developing nuclear weapons. There are casualties among the top command of the local forces. In particular, Israel eliminated the head of the nuclear program, Ali Shamkhani. He was also a senior advisor to Ayatollah Khamenei. Iran has promised harsh retaliation and has already launched strike drones in response. However, according to Israeli sources, none of them reached the territory. The United States distanced itself from this attack, but Trump stated that he knew about it in advance. Hundreds of military targets came under Israeli strikes, but mainly nuclear ones, including the uranium enrichment facility in Natanz. This is 225 kilometers from the capital. Thousands of modern centrifuges operated there, equipment used for enriching uranium gas, which is located dozens of meters underground for protection. At present, it is unclear what condition they are in, but the strike itself has already been confirmed by the IAEA, although no spike in radiation has been detected. At the same time, as a result of the attack, there are casualties among top officials of the Iranian military. For example, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is a powerful elite military unit, Hossein Salami, and Mohammad Bagheri, the chief of the general staff of the Iranian armed forces. Among the victims are also 6 nuclear scientists. At least 50 people were injured. Tehran's state television reported that women and children are among the injured. The special operation, codenamed Rising Lion, was prepared in advance, and last week the Western press warned about it. The main goal of the attack was to deliver a preemptive strike to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. The IDF shared that about 200 fighter jets were involved for this purpose. On the eve of the special operation, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went to pray and left a note at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. On the slip of paper was a biblical passage. She rises like a lioness and lifts herself up like a lion. Later, Netanyahu recorded an address in which he explained Tel Aviv's actions as defending Israel's existence.
In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atomic bombs. 9! In recent months, Iran has taken steps it has never taken before, steps to turn this enriched uranium into weapons. If Iran is not stopped, it could produce nuclear weapons in a very short time. This is a clear and present danger to the very survival of Israel.
Negative millionaires. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine congratulated the Russians on their day in its own way. This week, the aggressor country broke a record in the loss of manpower. Over 1 million occupiers and killers, whom it calls warriors. The General Staff of the Ukrainian military shared these festive statistics for Russia Day. The General Staff also published a video in which it compared Russian losses to the human resources used to build the wonders of the world. And to create the great cities across the planet, the staff calculated fewer people were needed than Russia has lost since the start of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As of today, that's 1 million and another 1,500 individuals. If they were truly people, they could have been building and discovering something new. Instead, they come to kill, to loot, and to seize Ukrainian territories.
The Great Pyramid of Khufu was built over 20 years by about 100,000 workers. They created something that would last for centuries. Narrator: 1 million Russians killed and maimed will never build anything again, because they came to destroy a neighboring country. We do not celebrate the enemy's losses. But the fewer occupiers there are on our land, the sooner we will liberate our territories.
Narrator female. The Security Service of Ukraine will strike the enemy where he believes himself to be untouchable. This was stated by Lieutenant General Vasil Malyuk, speaking about the special operation Spiderweb. Special forces have released new details about the world-famous Ukrainian operation deep in the Russian rear. First, the Security Service of Ukraine smuggled at least 117 FPV drones into Russia, and later also modular wooden houses from which the Ukrainian Avenger drones would subsequently take off. The operation was carried out simultaneously in 3 different time zones. The FPV drone operators struck precisely at fuel tanks, engines, and missiles. In the end, they hit more than 1/3 of the strategic aviation of the Russian Federation. The estimated losses for the enemy exceed $7 billion. This special operation was a response to the massive missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, hospitals, and energy infrastructure. By the way, in honor of the web, Ukrposhta is already preparing a new stamp. What it will look like will be revealed very soon, promised Director Ihor Smilyansky. And as has become tradition, this week Ukrainians were once again pleased to see cotton in Russia. Ukrainian fighters struck the Rezonit technopark in Zubovo-Moscow region. Explosions were heard at the facility. The consequences are still being clarified, according to the General Staff. This is an important facility of the military-industrial complex of the aggressor country. The circuit boards manufactured at Rezonit are integrated into flight control, navigation, targeting, and data transmission systems, including in Iskander and Caliber missiles, Kh-101, Orlan 10 and Lancet Cub drones, as well as in guidance units for artillery systems. Narrator: Russia constantly uses all of this in its war against Ukraine. A large-scale aviation disaster has occurred in India. A plane carrying 242 people crashed on board. The aircraft was supposed to fly to London but crashed just a few minutes after takeoff. On board were citizens of India, the United Kingdom, Portugal, and Canada. Only one passenger survived. The Boeing 787 was en route from Ahmedabad, a city in the west of the country, to London. At the crash site, numerous videos that appeared on social media showed thick black smoke. The plane had barely left the ground when an SOS signal was sent from it to the control tower. After that, the pilots did not make any further contact. The causes of the crash are being investigated. Currently, 4 possible scenarios are being considered, including engine failure or a malfunction of the aircraft's power unit. Rest in peace. Hi, 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 hi. Announcer. This week, mass protests swept through California. They erupted in response to anti-immigration raids initiated by Trump. In response to the unrest, the U.S. president sent 2,000 troops to California to quell the protests. At that point, local authorities accused Washington of escalating the situation and called for the National Guard to be withdrawn. The governor of California called this a serious violation of the state's sovereignty. People are setting cars and tires on fire, throwing smoke grenades. The soldiers, in turn, are using forceful dispersal tactics. Rubber bullets are being used. During the protests, an Australian journalist was even injured while she was broadcasting live. The protests in California began after mass raids by immigration and customs enforcement. These raids are being carried out as part of Trump's policy to combat illegal immigrants whom the president has ordered to be deported by the thousands. However, according to several American media outlets, law enforcement officers are arresting people indiscriminately, even those who have permits to reside in the U.S. In addition, California is a state that borders Mexico. So there are a lot of Spanish-speaking immigrants there who are unhappy with Washington's actions. That's why they took to the streets to protest against Trump. The suppression of the rallies was also criticized by Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum.
Claudia Sheinbaum, if we just stay at home, things will get worse. If we don't show that we are ready to fight for freedom.
Announcer. Musk wants to make peace. The controversial billionaire stated that he regrets some of his remarks about Donald Trump. He wrote about this on the social network X. According to the businessman, some of his posts published last week went too far. Tensions between the former political allies began in May when Elon Musk left his position at the U.S. Government Efficiency Department. At first, the businessman avoided publicly criticizing Trump, but then he criticized the budget bill. Mutual insults began. Trump wrote that Musk had gone crazy. Musk, for his part, accused the president of ingratitude, since he had invested about $250 million in his election campaign. He also hinted at the politician's connection to the late Jeffrey Epstein, who was convicted of human trafficking. Journalists found out that the situation was only resolved after a separate conversation between representatives of Trump and Musk. Announcer, a major prisoner exchange.
Its 3 stages took place on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday.
Servicemen under the age of 25 and those who were seriously wounded have returned home. This format was agreed upon during negotiations in Istanbul. Among them are members of the armed forces, the State Border Guard Service, as well as the National Guard. These are Ukrainians who fought in the Donetsk, Kherson, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, and Luhansk directions. Among the soldiers who have returned home are also defenders of Mariupol who had been held captive for more than 3 years. Some of those released had still been considered missing in action. The coordination headquarters reports that it continues its work, and the next stage of releasing Ukrainian defenders is expected to take place very soon. Once again, we welcome our defenders home at last.
Ukraine above all. I am unbreakable. I love my country. I would never sell it for anything. I love Ukraine. I love you. I love these people. Guys, one more time. Ukraine. Ukraine!
And against the backdrop of prisoner exchanges, Russia carried out horrific strikes on Ukrainian cities. Kyiv endured a hellish night leading into Tuesday. 7 out of 10 districts of the capital were affected by the massive attack. In the Obolonsky district, a woman was killed and 3 more people ended up in hospitals. The Russians attacked the city with ballistic missiles and strike drones, and the warheads of the drones were packed with shrapnel to harm as many people as possible. Apartment buildings and private houses were damaged. Here, the video captured the moment of impact on the Navigator residential complex in the Obolonsky district. Eyewitnesses heard a whole series of explosions. Apartments from the 2nd to the 4th floor were mangled there. Rescuers in Kyiv spent many hours extinguishing the fire. Firefighting helicopters were deployed in Kurenivka. There, large-scale destruction and fires broke out in private premises. Rescuers from the region also arrived to help. At the ruins, our correspondents met the owners of the local business. It was a workshop where clothing was sewn. There were 2 people on shift. They were injured, but their lives are not in danger.
We printed t-shirts. We printed clothing. There was nothing extra, nothing else here. Why hit this place? It makes no sense. Damn Russians, may you all die out.
There were 2 employees specifically working at this facility during the nighttime hours. At that particular time,
They pulled the security guard out from under the rubble, and the girl, the blast wave threw her out completely. And they took her home in a state of shock.
It was my property. Oh! Yeah, this is just a start now. We keep joking.
I still have my card, and he has a generator, so we'll just keep on working together as we always do.
The hit of the day is the firefighting helicopter, which is actively helping to battle the blaze.
Overall, on the night before Tuesday, the occupiers targeted not only Kyiv. A massive attack was endured by Dnipropetrovsk region, Kyiv region, Chernihiv region, and Odessa. In the city, 2 people were killed and 9 were injured. The Russians attacked a maternity hospital, a blood transfusion station, and residential buildings. TSN correspondent Serhiy Osatchuk shared his impressions from the city engulfed in fires.
After the first explosions, reports began to appear about a strike on the maternity hospital, where a fire broke out. However, thanks to the efforts of the medical staff, there were no casualties.
During air raid alerts, we all go down to the shelter. Ours is certified. There we have a delivery room, an operating room, and spaces for women with children and for pregnant women. The Shahed drone strike hit the administrative building, which stands separately. It is partially destroyed, partially damaged from after the strike. Our windows were blown out.
The blood transfusion station, which is next to the maternity ward, was also severely damaged. Until recently, the rooms were sterile, but now they look like this. The windows have been blown out along with the glass, and the equipment is overturned. But the most massive strike was right here, not far from Privos. Within a radius of 100 meters, 3 Shaheds exploded almost simultaneously. People say they ran out of their burning homes while debris was falling all around and cars were on fire.
Half asleep, I heard the first explosion. I only managed to get to the basement to hide, and that was it. Another explosion, and then another. And then I heard the screams of my neighbors. Screams, wild screams. I climbed out barefoot, ran across the glass, and then everything in the house had already fallen down.
And during this massive attack on Ukraine, the Russians, who love to boast about their Orthodox values, targeted a holy site where Yaroslav the Wise is buried. Because of the Russian shelling, part of the wall of St. Sophia Cathedral in Kyiv crumbled and the facade corners fell. The 1,000-year-old cathedral in the center of Kyiv is a legendary architectural monument included in the UNESCO World Heritage List. They struck at the heart of our identity, wrote Minister of Culture Tukitsky on social media. Currently, specialists from the reserve, together with investigators, are examining how serious the damage is. Preliminarily, only the exterior decoration was damaged. The interior was not affected. This is not the only monument that was damaged by the occupiers on the night before Tuesday. The Odessa film studio was also affected by the shelling. Pavilions, storage facilities, sets, and vehicles were all damaged.
The security staff were not frightened. They came, contained the fire, and this helped prevent significant losses. I also believe that heavenly forces are protecting the Odessa film studio, because if those Shaheds had flown just 5 meters further here from the span, we would have been putting out our warehouse costumes and props for an entire month. Since there is a very valuable, very precious collection there, there are over 60,000 items of costumes and props there, collected over 100 years.
These were the most notable events of the week, which will definitely have an impact on the coming week. Which of them resonated with you personally? Write in the comments under this episode, give us a like, and subscribe to our channel. See you next time!